4 days ago, a knock at the door jolted me awake. Standing there, barefoot in the rain, was a boy, no older than 8. His clothes were tattered, and his eyes brimmed with tears. "Mom," he whispered, clutching a weathered teddy bear. "I'm home." I froze. I live alone. I've never had children. The idea of a child, of motherhood, was a distant echo in the vast, empty chambers of my heart. My life was a carefully constructed fortress of solitude, built brick by brick with routines and habits designed to repel any intrusion, any connection. Yet here stood this child, a fragile, soaking wet testament to a life I didn't recognize, a life that felt impossibly intertwined with my own. I stammered something about calling for help, my voice a shaky whisper in the face of this unexpected reality. But the boy stepped inside, his frail arms wrapping around me. His skin was ice cold, his scent faintly metallic, a strange, unsettling aroma that clung to me even after he let go. He looked up with wide, desperate eyes, his gaze piercing through me, holding a depth of sadness that should not belong to a child so young. "You left me in the woods? I waited so long." The words, those simple, accusatory words, ripped through me like shards of glass. My stomach churned, a cold knot of fear tightening in my gut. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I had to lean against the doorframe to steady myself. Memories, or perhaps echoes of memories, flooded my mind, foggy forests, a child's desperate cries, a sense of panic and dread. My own hands, it felt like my own hands, releasing his tiny grip, a feeling of agonizing guilt washing over me. A sharp headache gripped me as the boy curled up on the couch, as if he belonged there, as if this was his home, my home, a place he had always known. The initial shock gave way to a gnawing sense of unease. Who was this child? Where did he come from? And why did the mere presence of him feel so profoundly wrong, yet so intimately familiar? I tried to rationalize it, to chalk it up to a strange encounter, a lost child who had stumbled upon my doorstep. But the way he called me, Mom, the cold intensity in his eyes, the faint metallic scent, they all whispered of something darker, something far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Each night since, the unsettling feeling intensified. He slept in the guest room, a room I hadn't used in years, a room that suddenly felt infused with a melancholic aura. He whispered unsettling things in his sleep, fragmented pleas, murmured accusations, words that seemed to echo the foggy memories that now plagued my waking hours. Last night, I woke to find him standing over my bed, his small figure silhouetted against the dim light of the moon. Tears streaked his pale face, and his voice, normally a soft whisper, was filled with raw anguish. "You promised to find me," he sobbed. "Why didn't you come back?" My heart hammered in my chest. It was a question that pierced through my carefully crafted denial. I tried to deny it, to push it back into the murky realm of the false memories, but the pain in his eyes, the desperation in his voice, they were real, tangible. They cut through the carefully woven fabric of my carefully constructed life. I found myself, for the first time in years, truly afraid. The fear was a cold, suffocating thing, wrapping around my insides like a constricting serpent. I needed to understand, to find some shred of logic in the madness that had descended upon my life. Today, I dug through old photos, desperate to prove he wasn't mine. My apartment was a modest one, sparsely decorated, a reflection of my solitary life. I didn't have children, never had, never wanted. But the boy's words, his presence, the way he looked at me with such desperate adoration and profound sorrow, had shattered the foundations of my existence. I searched through albums, boxes, drawers, desperately searching for any evidence, any clue that could confirm my sanity, that could solidify the reality I had painstakingly built. And then, in a dusty box tucked away in the back of a forgotten closet, I found it. A picture. A faded photograph, yellowed with age, depicting a younger me, a smile stretched across my face, holding a child. Him. My breath hitched in my throat. The boy in the photograph, his eyes were the same, mirroring the same deep sorrow and haunting familiarity. The teddy bear, slightly worn, was the same. It was a moment captured in time, a memory I had long forgotten, a memory that had been buried deep within the recesses of my mind. The world tilted on its axis. My carefully constructed reality was crumbling, replaced by a terrifying unknown. If he wasn't my son, if I hadn't abandoned him in the woods, then who was he? And why did he cling to me with such desperation? I tried to push him away, to tell him to leave, to plead with him to go back to wherever he came from. But my words were lost, swallowed by a strange, paralyzing fear, a fear that stemmed from the depths of my soul. He wouldn't leave. He wouldn't budge. He clung to me as if his very life depended on it. He knows things about me, things no stranger could. He knows the hidden corners of my heart, the unspoken regrets that I buried deep within me. He knows things I don't even remember, things that seem to be buried deep within my subconscious. I don't know what's real anymore. Was I truly a mother? Did I leave him in the woods, as he claimed? Or was it all a twisted hallucination, a figment of a mind fractured by loneliness and regret? My life, once a predictable and comfortable routine, has morphed into a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and fear. Is he a ghost? A fragment of my past, a manifestation of my deepest, darkest regrets? Or is he something far more sinister, something that feeds on the guilt and sorrow that I have carefully kept hidden within me? The questions gnaw at me, relentlessly, ceaselessly. I feel trapped in a nightmare woven from the threads of my own suppressed memories and the desperate pleas of a child who claims to be my son. I am terrified, but at the same time, a strange sense of responsibility has begun to bloom within me. Can I push him away? Do I even have the right to? He is here, a fragile anchor in the storm of my life. And for the first time in a long, long time, I feel both utterly lost and inexplicably bound to something outside of myself. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, or what fate has in store for us. But I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that my life will never be the same. I am no longer alone, and the consequences of my past, whatever they may be, have finally found me. Camping in the vast desert was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the city. The silence, broken only by the whispers of the wind, felt comforting at first. I pitched my tent near a cluster of boulders, the horizon a blend of fiery sunset and creeping darkness. By nightfall, the temperature plummeted, and I sat by my campfire, staring at the stars, marveling at how alone I was. The vast expanse of the night sky, peppered with a million glittering diamonds, offered a sense of awe and tranquility that was hard to find in the perpetually buzzing cityscape. The solitude, however, began to shift from comforting to unsettling as darkness deepened. The silence, once a soothing balm, started to feel heavy, pregnant with an unspoken anticipation. I kept fidgeting with my camping gear, trying to shake off the growing unease. It was a feeling I couldn't quite explain, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck that whispered of unseen eyes watching me. That's when I noticed the footprints. Not mine, bare feet, larger than any human's, circling my campsite. They were imprinted deeply into the sandy soil, the impression stark and unsettling against the otherwise undisturbed landscape. The wind hadn't erased them, meaning they were fresh. A cold dread snaked its way through me, chilling me to the bone. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my flashlight. The beams sliced through the darkness, casting dancing shadows over the rocks and the desolate landscape. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from one shadow to another, desperately seeking the source of the footprints. The air hung thick with an unnerving quiet, the only sound the crackling of the dying embers in my campfire. Shadows danced over the rocks, but nothing moved. Yet, the presence of the unknown was undeniable. My skin crawled with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was out there, lurking in the shadows, observing my every move. Around midnight the stillness was broken. A low, guttural growl, unlike any animal sound I had ever heard, ripped through the night. It was too deep for a coyote, too menacing for anything else I could conjure in my mind. The growl sent shivers down my spine, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Then, a scraping sound, like nails dragging across stone, came from the boulders, sending a wave of terror through me. My hand shook as I shone my flashlight toward the noise. For a split second, bathed in the artificial light, I saw it. A twisted figure, hunched and gaunt, emerged from the shadows. Its skin was a sickly gray, almost translucent, and it seemed to shimmer slightly in the darkness. Its limbs were long and slender, ending in what looked like clawed hands. Its eyes, large and glowing with an unnatural light, were fixed on me, burning with an intensity that made my breath hitch in my throat. Its mouth, filled with jagged, uneven teeth, twitched as if it were deciding something, a silent contemplation that sent a cold dread through me. Terror seized me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, my mind screaming for escape. I backed toward my tent, my legs trembling uncontrollably. But the firelight cast my shadow too far. It moved, stretched unnaturally, as if the creature controlled it, elongated and distorted, a monstrous mockery of my own form. I screamed, a raw, animalistic sound that tore through the silence. The creature let out another growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. It lurched forward, its movements fluid and unsettlingly fast, sending a surge of primal fear through me. I scrambled into my tent, zipping it shut with trembling hands, the creature's guttural growls echoing outside, its presence pressing against the flimsy fabric like a suffocating blanket. The next few moments were a blur of terror and confusion. I huddled in my sleeping bag, my eyes wide with fear, listening to the sounds outside. The creature's growls shifted into a series of scraping noises, accompanied by the frantic tearing of fabric. The tent poles groaned under some unseen pressure, and I felt a cold sensation of dread wash over me as I realized the creature was trying to get in. Then, everything went black. I woke up miles from my campsite, the sun already high in the sky. My head throbbed, and my body ached as if I'd been run over by a truck. My gear was gone, vanished without a trace. My car, parked a good distance away, was covered in deep, unexplainable claw marks, marring the pristine paintwork. The scratches were deep and ragged, as if some monstrous creature had raked its claws across the metal, leaving behind an indelible mark of its passage. I stared at the damage, my mind struggling to process what had happened. My camping trip, which had started with such peaceful anticipation, had become a terrifying nightmare. The creature, whatever it was, had taken my belongings, left me stranded and injured, yet somehow, it had spared my life. But why? The question gnawed at me, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. Why had it allowed me to live? Was it a game? A test? Or was there some other, more sinister reason behind its actions? Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night continued to haunt me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the creature was still out there, somewhere in the vast emptiness of the desert. The silence of the city, which had once been a source of comfort, now felt unnervingly similar to the desert night, filled with a silent anticipation of something lurking in the shadows. I tried to piece together the fragments of that night, searching for any logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The creature, with its unearthly features and grotesque strength, didn't fit into any known category of animal or human. Its intelligence, its calculated actions, its ability to control my shadow, all pointed to something far beyond my comprehension. The incident changed me. My perspective on the world shifted, my sense of security shattered. The world, I realized, was a far more mysterious and terrifying place than I had ever imagined. I no longer felt safe in the vastness of the desert, or anywhere else for that matter. The desert, once a symbol of peace and solitude, now held an undercurrent of dread, a whisper of the unknown that I could never fully erase. The creature's actions, its decision to let me live, remained a baffling enigma. I often found myself wondering if it was a benevolent act or a cruel game. Was it a message? A warning? The answer, I realized, might forever remain lost in the whispering sands of the desert, a mystery that would haunt me for the rest of my days. The desert, in a way, had become a part of me, a constant reminder of the unknown, of the fragility of human existence in the face of something far older, far more powerful, and utterly incomprehensible. The whispers of the wind, once comforting, now carried a hint of that guttural growl, a chilling reminder that the desert held more secrets than I could ever hope to unravel. And as I looked up at the night sky, I couldn't help but wonder if those glittering stars held the answers to the mysteries that had forever etched themselves into my memory. The desert had swallowed my peace, replaced it with a haunting fear, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. And I, a mere mortal, was left to carry the burden of that knowledge, forever marked by the encounter with the creature that stalked the desert night. I've been a search and rescue volunteer for years, so when I got the call about 2 women missing in the woods behind my house, it didn't faze me. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. The dense trees, the winding paths, nothing too dangerous. Or so I thought. The call had come in around 3 p.m., a frantic report from a concerned friend. Sarah and Emily, 2 young women out for a leisurely afternoon hike, had vanished without a trace. Their phones were dead, and the friend had grown increasingly worried when they hadn't returned by nightfall. I'd been prepping dinner when the call came in, the tantalizing aroma of rosemary and garlic permeating the air. It was a Wednesday, my usual off day from my real job as a carpenter. But when it comes to helping those in need, especially in the woods that had been my playground since childhood, there's no such thing as a day off. I grabbed my trusty headlamp, a sturdy pair of hiking boots, and my trusty compass, a relic from my grandfather's days as a surveyor. I threw a bottle of water and a few energy bars in my backpack, and was out the door in a matter of minutes. The sun was beginning to dip as I ventured deeper into the underbrush, calling out their names. Sarah! Emily! Can you hear me? My voice echoed through the silent trees, swallowed by the encroaching twilight. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an unnerving silence that clung to the air. It was the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end, a silence that seemed to hum with unspoken dread. I paused, a chill crawling up my spine. Something felt wrong. The woods, usually a comforting haven, felt different. The air grew thicker, heavier, like the woods were holding their breath, anticipating something sinister. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth was overlaid with a subtle, metallic tang that sent a shiver down my spine. I continued, pushing through the thick brush, determined to find them. I followed the faintest of trails, the one they likely used on their hike. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. The thought of them being hurt, lost, alone in the encroaching darkness, fueled my resolve. Then I stumbled upon something unexpected. It wasn't the women. It was their belongings, clothes, shoes, a bright pink water bottle Emily always carried, a worn paperback book Sarah claimed she was rereading for the 10th time. They were scattered in a hurried panic, a haphazard mess amidst the undergrowth. But no sign of the women. Just the items, discarded like they had been tossed aside, as if they'd been ripped from their bodies in a desperate struggle. My mind raced, a whirlwind of possibilities and worries. Had they encountered a wild animal? Had they fallen and gotten injured? Was someone else involved? The questions swirled in my head, demanding answers. Then I heard a voice. Soft, almost a whisper. Help me! I froze. It was one of the missing women, or at least, it sounded like her. The voice was raspy, laced with panic and a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I followed the sound, heart racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins, until I reached a clearing. And there they were, not the women I was looking for. 2 figures stood motionless, their eyes wide, hollow, and disturbingly far apart. They weren't human. The same clothes the women wore hung loosely on their twisted frames, the bright pink of Emily's water bottle now stained with a dark, almost viscous, substance. Their skin was a ghastly pale, almost translucent, and their limbs seemed elongated, too thin for their frame. Their mouths stretched into grotesque smiles, a horrifying parody of genuine happiness. The sight of them sent a wave of nausea through me, my stomach clenching in a knot of terror. This wasn't Sarah and Emily. It wasn't even close. They began to move towards me, their steps in perfect unison, a chillingly mechanical motion that sent a tremor through my body. They didn't run, they didn't walk, they just moved, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat, my mind screaming for me to run. But my feet were rooted to the earth, my body paralyzed by a primal fear I'd never known. The air grew heavy in my lungs, the metallic tang more pungent, and a low, guttural sound emanated from the beings, a sound that was both a growl and a laugh. A sound that promised pain, that resonated with the chilling absence of life. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was their laughter, inhuman and cold. It echoed through the woods, a chilling symphony of despair that seemed to seep into my very soul. Underscore 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 underscore. I woke up in the hospital bed, the sterile scent of disinfectant a stark contrast to the pungent odor of the woods. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a stark reminder that I was no longer in the clutches of that terrifying darkness. A nurse, her face a mask of professional concern, was checking my vitals. "How are you feeling, Mr. Miller?" she asked, her voice soft and gentle. I tried to speak, but only a hoarse croak escaped my lips. My throat was raw, my body aching from head to toe. "Easy, take your time," she said, placing a cool cloth on my forehead. "You've been through a lot." "The woods," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "The women, those things." The nurse's brow furrowed. "The woods? What about the woods?" I struggled to explain, to articulate the horror I had witnessed. The twisted figures, the chilling laughter, the sudden darkness. But the words wouldn't come. It was as if my mind was trying to protect me from the memory, to shield me from the raw terror of the encounter. The doctors came and went, running tests, asking questions. They gave me tranquilizers to calm my racing mind, and for a while, I drifted in and out of a haze of medication and fear. The official story was that I'd suffered from a severe concussion and heat stroke, lost in the woods, delusional from exhaustion and dehydration. It was a convenient explanation, one that allowed them to dismiss my experience as simply a byproduct of a frightened man's mind. But I knew better. I spent weeks recovering, both physically and mentally. The image of those creatures haunted my dreams, their grotesque smiles a constant torment. I tried to bury the memory, to pretend it was all a bad dream, but it clung to me like a shadow. When I finally went back to the woods, it was a different place. The familiar trails, the comforting scent of pine, it was all tainted by the memory of what I had seen. The silence wasn't comforting anymore, but a constant reminder of the malevolent presence that lurked within. I couldn't go back to search and rescue. The woods had become a source of terror, a constant threat. Even the mundane tasks of my carpentry job, tasks I once found comforting and grounding, were now tinged with the dread of the unknown. I tried to talk to others about what I had seen, but I was met with disbelief, with pity, with a polite dismissal. "It was just stress, Mr. Miller. You were overwhelmed. Your mind was playing tricks on you." No one believed me. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying aspect of it all. The woods are still there, a dark, silent expanse behind my house. I've learned to avoid them, to steer clear of the path that led to that horrifying clearing. But the memory of what I saw, the inhuman laughter, the cold touch of dread, it is forever etched into my soul. I'm not sure what those creatures were, or where they came from. I'm not sure if they are still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victims. But I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that the woods are not the same. They are not the refuge they once were. They are a place of secrets and shadows, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and where the only sounds are the whispers of the wind and the chilling laughter that echoes through the trees. And I know that the next time I hear that laughter, it might be the last thing I ever hear. I hadn't heard from my ex in months, but then, out of the blue, she started texting me. At first, I thought it was harmless, maybe just her reaching out for closure or to see how I was doing. But the messages were odd, short, almost robotic, like someone mimicking her voice but not quite getting it right. "Hey," it would say. Or, "How are you?" The usual pleasantries, but devoid of the warmth and playful banter that had once defined our conversations. At first, I ignored it, convinced it was just her being nostalgic, perhaps trying to rekindle some forgotten spark in a clumsy, awkward way. The text continued, sporadically at first, then with increasing frequency. They were always brief, never elaborating on anything, never asking anything truly personal. It was as if she was following a script, a pre-programmed sequence of greetings and meaningless pronouncements. I found myself growing increasingly uneasy. This wasn't Sarah, not the Sarah I knew. Then came the phone calls. It started subtly, a missed call here and there, no voicemail, just a brief flash on my phone screen. Then, it became more insistent. Every couple of days the phone would ring, and I'd pick it up, only to be met with silence. It was unnerving, a silent, persistent intrusion into my life. I'd quickly hang up, heart hammering in my chest, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. It started small, a creeping sensation of unease in the quiet of my apartment. At night, while lying in bed, I would feel like someone was standing just outside my window. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and I could hear soft tapping on the glass, a rhythmic, insistent sound that sent shivers down my spine. I chalked it up to nerves, to the lingering anxiety of a relationship gone wrong, a residual fear of the unknown. But it only got worse. The tapping became more frequent, the shadows lingered longer. I found myself constantly checking the locks on my doors, peering out the window, convinced that I was being observed, that something, or someone, was lurking just beyond the periphery of my vision. My sleep became a series of fitful starts and sudden awakenings, my dreams haunted by distorted images of Sarah, her face contorted into a grotesque mockery of her former self. My friends noticed the change in me. I became withdrawn, jumpy, prone to sudden bursts of paranoia. They tried to help, suggesting I see a therapist, assuring me that it was just post-breakup stress, that I needed to move on. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. The texts and calls continued, growing more insistent, more unsettling. The feeling of being watched intensified, making my days a constant state of heightened awareness. I started avoiding going out at night, barricading myself in my apartment, clinging to the illusion of safety within its four walls. One evening, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and frustration, I decided I had enough. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, dreading the ringing of my phone, the tapping on my window. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening, to confront the source of this unnerving disturbance. I decided to go to Sarah's apartment, hoping to find some explanation, some resolution. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond my comprehension. Driving to her old neighborhood, my hands were clammy on the steering wheel, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The familiar streets seemed alien now, every shadow a potential hiding place, every rustle of leaves a whispered threat. When I arrived at her building, it was eerily quiet, an unsettling stillness that amplified the dread creeping through my veins. I walked up the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and reached her apartment door. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, stepping into the darkness of her apartment. The air was stale, filled with the faint, musty smell of dust and decay. It was completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, not even a single photograph or trinket to suggest that someone had ever lived there. It was as though she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the echo of her absence. As I walked through the vacant rooms, a sense of profound unease washed over me. It was like stepping into a forgotten memory, a ghost of a life that never truly existed. Then my phone buzzed. It was a picture of me, standing in the middle of her living room, taken from a shadowy corner I hadn't noticed. The message was chillingly simple. You should have never come here. My blood ran cold. I felt a prickle of fear crawl up my spine, a chilling realization dawning upon me. It wasn't just the texts, the calls, the feeling of being watched. It was something more profound, something far more sinister. Suddenly, I heard something, a whispering voice, familiar, but wrong, echoing from the shadows. It was Sarah's voice, yet it was distorted, a warped imitation of her natural tone, a haunting echo of the robotic texts and the silent phone calls. You shouldn't have come, the voice hissed, a chilling whisper that seemed to slither through the empty rooms. You should have stayed away. That's when I realized, my ex wasn't just acting weird. She had never left. Something had happened to her, something that had twisted her essence, corrupted her very being. Whatever it was, it had taken her form, mimicking her voice, her mannerisms, but it wasn't Sarah anymore. It was a hollow echo, a grotesque imitation, a parasitic entity that had taken residence in her shell. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, my mind struggling to reconcile the reality of the situation with the impossible. The whispering grew louder, more menacing. You can't escape me. It hissed, its voice slithering through the air like a serpent. I'm always watching. I didn't wait to see what else this monstrous imitation of Sarah had in store for me. I fled the apartment, my footsteps pounding on the stairs, my breath ragged in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I never went back to that apartment, never looked for Sarah again. It was as if she had vanished into a void, leaving behind only the memory of her spectral imitation. The text stopped, the calls ceased, but the memory of the whispering voice, the feeling of being watched, lingered. It became a part of me, a constant reminder of the night I stumbled upon the terrifying truth. Sometimes, the things we fear most are not the things that leave, but the things that never truly go away. The fear never truly dissipated. I learned to live with a constant prickle of paranoia, a deep-seated unease that shadows me to this day. The world, once a familiar and comforting place, now felt different, perpetually tinged with a sense of unseen presences, of whispers in the dark. I am forever haunted by the echo of Sarah's voice, twisted and corrupted, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying things are not monsters in the shadows, but the ghosts that linger within the echoes of our past. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, a break from the monotony of daily life. My buddy and I, Mark, took off in the dead of night, heading through the empty stretch of highway that cuts through the desert. The stars were out, a million pinpricks of light against the inky canvas of the sky, the air crisp and carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. The road was eerily silent, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast, desolate landscape. We were both craving escape. The routine of our lives, the same cubicle, the same commute, the same predictable days, had started to feel like a cage. We needed a change, a jolt to remind us that life could be more than a series of monotonous motions. A road trip, a journey into the unknown, seemed like the perfect antidote. The old beat-up Ford pickup truck, affectionately nicknamed the Wanderer, rumbled along the highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. Mark, ever the jokester, had a playlist of classic rock blasting from the speakers, his voice occasionally joining in with off-key singing. I, on the other hand, was more subdued, content to simply observe the changing scenery. The desert, lit by the pale moonlight, stretched out before us, a sea of sand and rock punctuated by the occasional scraggly bush. About an hour into the drive, something felt off. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. We passed a dilapidated gas station, its flickering neon lights casting a sickly yellow glow onto the cracked asphalt. The pumps were rusted and leaning at odd angles, the windows boarded up with plywood. Looks like something out of a horror movie. Mark chuckled, giving the gas station a sideways glance before returning his attention to the road ahead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, a sense of being observed by unseen eyes. As we drove further, the atmosphere grew heavier, like a thick blanket settling over the desert. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper, died down completely. The world outside the truck seemed to hold its breath, a stillness that was unnerving in its intensity. That's when I saw it. On the side of the road, just beyond the edge of our headlights, stood a figure. A man, or at least, something that resembled a man. He was tall and gaunt, his skin a sickly pale that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. His face was distorted, features stretched and warped in a way that felt unnatural, like a grotesque caricature of humanity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my chest. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It just stood there, motionless, staring directly at us. There was no car, no sign of any vehicle, just this solitary figure standing in the vast emptiness of the desert night. "Mark," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the growl of the engine. "Did you see that?" Mark, who had been humming along to the music, snapped his head towards me, his eyes widening in alarm. "See what? What is it?" I pointed towards the figure, but by then, it was gone. Vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the cold silence of the night. We drove past the spot where we'd seen the figure, but the atmosphere hadn't returned to its previous state. The air felt colder, a chill that seeped into my bones despite the warmth of the truck's heater. The engine began to sputter, losing power, as if it was being drained of its life force. "What the hell?" Mark exclaimed, struggling to maintain control of the truck. Then we heard it. A thud, a dull, heavy sound, like someone was banging on the roof of the car. My blood ran cold. "Pull over, Mark!" I shouted, my voice filled with panic. Mark slammed on the brakes, the truck jolting to a halt. We both scrambled out of the truck, our hearts pounding in our chests. We looked around frantically, searching for the source of the noise. But there was nothing. No one. No tracks in the sand, no sign of anyone having been there. We stood there for a long time, frozen in place, the silence of the desert pressing in on us. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew something had followed us from that road, something unseen, something sinister. We got back into the truck, the silence between us thick and heavy. Mark's usual jovial demeanor was gone, replaced by a grim silence. We didn't turn on the radio, didn't speak a word for the rest of the journey, each of us lost in our own thoughts, replaying the events of the night over and over again. We eventually made it back to our starting point, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. We were exhausted, shaken, and profoundly disturbed by our experience. We didn't talk much about it after that, not in detail. The memory was too vivid, too terrifying. It haunted our dreams, lingered in the back of our minds like a persistent shadow. It's been years since that road trip, and I still have nightmares about that night. The pale figure standing by the side of the road, the unnerving silence, the thud on the roof of the truck. I've never been able to shake the feeling that something was watching us, something that followed us back into our ordinary lives, lurking just beyond the edges of our perception. I don't know if it was human. I don't know if it was even alive in the way we understand life. But I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it was something far worse. Something that exists outside the realm of our understanding, something that dwells in the shadows of the desert, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to cross its path. And I swear to God, I'll never take another road trip again. The thrill of escape is not worth the potential cost. The memory of that encounter, of that chilling, otherworldly presence, is a constant reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved, some roads best left untraveled. The desert holds secrets, and some secrets are far better left buried in the sand.